What a unique opportunity we have right now. It's amazing, like hundreds of people watching what we're getting ready to talk about right now. And as we were getting ready and preparing, I was just thinking about this new series that we're in, Contradictions, and what a contradiction it is to take a time when we're all kind of like messed up right now and everything's going crazy in our lives, and be concerned about people all over the world and in other places in the world. But what I was also thinking about too was, what not a better time to have this conversation, because people, and this is always the case, but people are dying. Death is very real right now. And so what not a better time to have a conversation like this. I'm glad that you guys are here with us today. And so for our audience out here, I want to introduce, I told you guys we had a special treat this week because I wanted you guys to see when you give at Crossroads here, what your giving goes toward, besides just doing what we do here. It reaches out to the ends of the earth, and I mean that literally. And so I am so like happy, so thrilled to be a part of a ministry that I know is getting it done. And it's not just me, it's you guys. I mean, you guys are connected to this ministry. In fact, David here, as I get ready to introduce him, he'll tell you he actually works for you. So that's what he does here. He does this ministry that God has laid on his heart and gifted him and his son Jared to do all over the world, and we're able to be a part of that and bless multitudes of people. So let me go ahead right now and just go ahead and introduce some people. First of all, everybody knows this guy.
What's up, Crossroads fam? Miss you guys.
Everybody knows Chris. Somebody said a while ago, when people see Chris, they just start laughing. But no, and now y'all just started laughing. I know you did. But this is the group, the Timothy Initiative here. Yes. At least two of them anyway. I know it's a little bigger than this. In fact, it's pretty big all over the world. You guys already know this guy, David Nelms. David, thank you for being here with us. I'm not sure how many of you have met Jared. Jared's been here a time or two with us. And this is Jared Nelms, David's son. And so we're going to have a conversation today. I'm going to have to turn where I can see you guys a little bit better and not break my neck here. But we just want to have a conversation today about the work of the Timothy Initiative and what's going on with this ministry in the world and how it's reaching people. And I just remember the first time that I met you, and I was at a little pastor's conference, just a small one with Journey Church in Raleigh over there, Jimmy Carroll. And if I remember right, Jimmy Carroll really, he really encouraged pastors to get on board with what you guys were doing. And he even said it in a way that it was such as like, you know how Jimmy is. He was pretty blunt. And he's like, don't worry about it. You just need to do it. Just go do it, right? But I felt like the Lord spoke to my heart in that. Said, I feel like these are guys I need to team up with. So I started making contact with you, and one thing led to another. And then I ended up going on these trips to Vietnam. And that's turned into all kinds of other stories too. But just seeing what the Lord is doing and how he's using you guys has it's been amazing. It's been an amazing journey for me. So I'm just going to ask some questions here. We kind of got some questions we're going to throw out here. We got some videos, got some graphics and things, tell some stories and things. So why don't you tell us, David, why don't you start off and just tell us about TTI?
Yeah, well, Scott and Chris, we're just so excited to be here. Yeah. I think this is it's at least my fourth straight Palm Sunday with you guys. Maybe the fifth. So I think I'm an official crossroader now. Okay? I don't have a mule yet. I got to get me a mule. Okay?
I want you to ride it next time you come.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, TTI stands for the Timothy Initiative. And what we do is we make disciple makers. Yeah. We make disciples who make disciples. And in our context, if you think a little Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist village where there's no church, and 2 or 3 people become followers of Christ, they will join together. They will gather together. They'll worship. They'll study the scriptures. They'll pray. So the byproduct of making disciple makers would be churches spring up. And so we plant churches primarily in parts of the world where there are very few or no churches. And I don't know if I should use the word specialty, but our focus would be planting churches among what's called unreached people groups. There's about 7,000, 7,500 ethnicities that are classified as unreached, and we're currently planting churches among 750 plus of them. And Jerry, maybe you can explain a little bit more what that means exactly.
Yeah, so we have a chart. Hopefully, those of you at home will be able to see it. But the world can really be divided into 3 different regions, if you will, or maybe classifications. So there's 3 worlds really happening around the world. So there you can see the blue world there, 33% of the world would be considered Christian, all right? Then you have 26% of the world that could be classified as non-Christian. Now the difference between those two is simply the Christian world means the majority of the people in that people group or in that country would identify as Christian. Non-Christian world means the majority would not identify as Christian. That's pretty simple. Then you have the unreached world, which is 41% of the world. That's 3 billion people. Those are people with less than 5% Christian and less than 2% evangelical. So those are people groups in entire nations that are completely unreached with the gospel. The majority of those not having churches, not having Christians, anywhere that they go. So if you look at the world like that, the largest chunk, obviously, is the unreached world. And we just put up 2 little percentages there. If you look at the world as a whole, the unreached portion, the 3 billion people that are unreached, receive 3% of the missionaries and 1% of the missions dollars.
Yeah, and so that's the area, Scott, Chris, that we would focus in. And if I could just mention a couple more things, we've, and when I say we, it's more Jared and his team, they have developed a system and a strategy. Basically what we do is we've removed what I call the 3 S's: salaries, seminaries, sanctuaries. Nothing wrong with any of those things. They're all great, okay? But they're great tools. But when you're in parts of the world where in some cases it's illegal to talk about Jesus, and if you build a church, they're going to burn it down, in some parts of the world, it's just not practical to do all of that. So if you take out the salaries, taking out the salaries, we train tent makers, we train regular Christ followers, just regular normal people, okay? Which we believe that's what the Bible teaches. And if you just use your house or under a tree, you don't need a sanctuary. And we would say the local church should be the primary place to train and to equip Christ followers anyway, not the seminary. So you take out those 3 S's, and what you've done is you've really lowered the cost of planting churches. You're a church planter. You know how expensive it is.
Oh, yeah.
But if you take out those 3 S's, you can really do it a lot cheaper. We've got it down globally to about $300 will plant a church. And along with it, there's a lot of other stuff. We've developed a 2,500-page curriculum. And again, it's all local church based. We would say the local church is the front lines. See, what you guys are doing here in Benson, you're on the front lines.
So I have a question. How in the world did TTI get started?
Yeah, well, by the grace of God. But to answer that question, we've got a video that we can show you that I think will make it real clear.
Awesome.
Hi, my name is David Nelms. About 10 years ago, I was in Asia. I went out to visit a village, just a little village. There in that village, I saw the young men out in the fields working. I saw the young women taking care of their children. I saw the older ladies cooking. The older men were just sitting under a tree talking. And the little children were running around doing what little children do, just having a good time. I noticed there were Hindu temples. I saw a mosque or 2, but I didn't see a church. I asked my friend who was with me, "Where are the churches?" And he answered, "There is not a church here. There has never been a church here. There may never be a church here." Now, I already understood all of that in my mind, that there were hundreds of thousands of villages all across Asia, not to mention the rest of the world, that had never had a church, ever. But that day something happened. The realization of it all moved from my head down deep into my heart. These are real people, families, people that Jesus died for. And it wasn't that they were rejecting the gospel. They weren't rejecting Jesus. They didn't know who he was. Nobody had ever told them. Something happened to me that day. It just broke my heart. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that we had to do something. Well, I had some friends in Asia, some friends in the States, and we got together, and a strategy was developed that today is known as the Timothy Initiative. It's real simple. We don't build buildings. We don't send people away to seminary. We don't worry about titles. We just lead people to Christ and then disciple them to, in turn, make disciples who make disciples. It's simple. It's reproducible. It's the book of Acts. Being filled with the Spirit, praying, loving people, going out and telling people about Jesus, and then training them to do the exact same thing. Jesus told us his very last words. He said, "Go make disciples of all nations." He did not say build cathedrals. He did not say develop big structures. He said make disciples who make disciples, and that's exactly what we do. Is it working? Oh my goodness, yes. There are tens of thousands of churches that have been planted all over the world. Jesus told us that one day around his throne, there will be people gathered from every language group, every people group, every tribe, every nation. Together with other partners that we work with, I can see that day becoming a reality. Man, I'm excited. I'm so excited. I believe we're going to see the task, the Great Commission task, finished in just the next few years.
Wow, I love that. I love that. So you guys have been around how long now? Maybe you said, how long have you guys been? How long has this been going on?
13 years.
13 years. So Jared, tell us where we at right now. What all's happened? Kind of give me an update on everything.
Yeah, so I shared about the unreached world there, where 84% of our work happens among the 3 billion people who have very little to no access to the gospel. So a few stats to throw up on the screen there. Just this last year, we saw 16,000 plus churches planted in 2019. And that brings our totals to 76,000. Which, if you take the average church at around 20 people, that's over 1.5 million new disciples. And one thing that's maybe fitting for this time is there's a slogan that says, every believer is called to be a disciple, every disciple is called to be a disciple maker, and every disciple maker's home is a potential church. So you at home today in your house church are joining us live.
Exactly right.
And one of the things we added through the years is every church is called to make an impact in their community. So every church that's been planted over the last 5 or 6 years has been challenged to take in an orphan, take in a widow, meet some social injustice in their village or their community. And in doing that, we've reached and impacted over 30,000 orphans and widows around the world. So it's been an incredible ride the last 13 years.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is great.
So 13 years going. How does 2020 looking in this year?
Well, with Corona, everything has a different perspective. Our plans right now, though, we're working in a little over 30 countries around the world. And this year, by far, is our largest work. The numbers are around 50 to 60,000 what we call Timothys, who are the disciple makers that are being trained to plant churches. And the people that they train, we call Tituses. That's a second generation disciple maker, which will be well over 100,000. So 150 to 160,000 people are going to be trained around the world in 2020.
Amen.
Wow. So talking about this virus thing here, globally, how is that affecting what's going on with TTI?
Yeah, so everyone is pretty much in the same boat. We're all locked in our homes, staring at one another. Here we have internet and access to a lot of things that are much easier for us, like Netflix and other things to watch to keep us busy. Most of our people don't have the facilities and the developments that we have. So even basic things like saying you need to wash your hands repeatedly, that assumes you have running water in your home and that you have soap to buy, or that you have access to sanitizer. And I've heard many, many stories from the field so far of our leaders and our church planners struggling just to find basic food and rice and access to things. Most of the shops are only opening for a few hours a day, and even that, there's huge lines. I heard a story from Sri Lanka. They opened up shopping for 4 hours, and the guy stood in line for 4.5 hours to get into the shop. So by the time the curfew was closed, he hadn't even been inside yet. So those are the realities of the situation around the world. But it's brought pretty much all of the trainings and the gatherings to a halt. So it's trying times.
If I could just add to that, Scott, you've been to Vietnam, and up in the mountains there, a lot of those houses, as Jared said, don't have running water, and there are not a lot of clinics up there, not a lot of hospitals, and like you said, hand sanitizer. It's not that they've run out of it; they never had it.
Right.
Or the wipes, or we've been joking about I can't find toilet paper, but they never had any to start with. We've got one of our key leaders who they're having such a hard time finding food. He is cut back to 2 meals a day, and it's just because they just don't have enough food. So it's stuff like that makes it a little bit more. It is affected everywhere.
So, so in light of this COVID-19 virus, I think it would be good if we knew exactly, and even those who are watching, how should, like, the church, not just us, but like the church, the people watching at home, how should we respond to this?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. There's a couple of verses that have just kept coming to my mind over and over again during this pandemic. And Scott, if I can just say, I'm so proud of this church. I'm so proud of your attitude, the way you've approached this thing. You're not running away from it. You're running right at it.
Amen.
And I just so appreciate that. But the one verse that I would say for the Crossroaders at home is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Most of us can quote it. Trust in the Lord. We're supposed to be trusting in the Lord not with some of our heart, but with all of our heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. And it doesn't say He'll think about directing our paths. It doesn't say, well, maybe I will, maybe I won't. He said, I'll direct your path. And, we memorize that verse, we quote that verse, we preach on that verse. God has now given us an incredible opportunity to actually live it out. If there was ever a time to be trusting God and not leaning on our own understanding, that doesn't mean we don't wash our hands. It doesn't mean we don't keep our distance. God gave us, my mother used to say, God gave you a head for something more than a hat rack, okay? So I think, we got to use common sense. Jesus said, be wise as a serpent. We got to use common sense. But this is a great time to trust God. And then the next verse, Psalms 20 there, I love this verse. Some people trust in chariots. Some people trust in horses. We will trust in the name of the Lord our God. Amen. And that applies to everyday life. It applies to some of your people have been laid off in the last week or two. And some of them are going to have businesses close. And some have had loved ones get sick. And some may have loved ones die. And that's I don't want to make light of that. The pain is real. It's there. And we need to be very careful. but God has given us, not only as believers, but as churches, an incredible opportunity to trust Him and to rely upon Him. And Scott, I appreciate your attitude. You're wanting to plant in the middle of this virus when people are scared to death and the market is crashing, and you're saying, hey, the principles don't change. Right. There's still a God in heaven. He's still on His throne. Satan doesn't take a day off. People are still dying and going to hell without Jesus. And so, hey, as a church, let's do something about it. Let's not lean on our own understanding and retreat back into our foxholes. Let's charge the gates of hell. So that's the attitude I think we need to have.
Amen.
Absolutely. Yeah, so this past fall, when you had invited me to the Global Partner Weekend down in Florida, and Tanya and I went, and man, it was just so impactful, so moving for me and her both. And the things that we learned, the people that we met, the missionaries, some of the people that are actually getting the work done in all the different nations and all over there that showed up and gave their testimonies, it was remarkable. This strategy, though, that unfolded there that you guys sort of like released and let people know what you were really up to, called the Achieve strategy, I guess, is project, the Achieve project. It means a church in every village, which you could say that and you could think small if you want to, but that is a monumental task when you begin to understand how many actual villages there are. And you guys are starting this, and I'm going to let you tell it for sure, but starting this in India and Nepal. And so go ahead and explain to me more, explain to our people about that, because that one really got me excited about the future, because I saw something in that. I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. That's what I've described to Tanya. I've described to my people, the people that I've shared this with. I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I can hardly wait till we get through with this, because I got something I want to share with our people about that. But if you would describe that, what's going on there for us?
Yeah. So many ministries in every country we work, the leaders, the pastors, they say, we're going to reach this country with the gospel. And we're going to reach every people in every place. And when you dig a little bit deeper, you say, that's great. Now how are we going to do it? And usually the response is, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And somehow it's going to happen. So our guys, over the last few years, really started thinking through, if we really want to reach every people in every place, every village with the gospel, you have to work backwards. So where is every village and who is every people? Where are they located? And where are their Christians and where are their churches? And by the process of elimination, you find out which villages have churches and Christians and which ones don't. So when you look at India and Nepal as a whole, you're talking around 700,000 plus villages. So just the idea of that, let that sink in. 700,000 places where there's people. And you add those two countries, it's well over 1.2 billion people, where the overwhelming majority are lost. And the overwhelming majority of the lost have never heard the name of Jesus, have never had a chance to respond to the gospel. So the Achieve, the acronym, A Church in Every Village, was born out of the desire to reach those villages. So we have a few pictures to show. First of all, that's just a picture of India and Nepal there. All those dots represent different training centers that are going to be happening in 2020 and 21. Wow. So in Nepal, we have about 500 training centers, training about 10,000 church planners. In India, we have closer to 1,500 to 2,000. It's still to be determined because Corona has stopped us temporarily. Mm-hmm. But that's going to be closer to 30,000 plus church planners in training. So part of the process of church planning is going to find the empty fields. And an empty field means, where is the gospel not being preached? Where is the gospel not known? So in every place that we work, there's states, there's districts, there's blocks, and there's villages. So I have a slide here of an actual block in one of the countries. And for every person that we're working with, they have a block that they know where they live. It's similar to like a county here. So everybody knows what county they live in, whether you're in Wake County or whatever the county is here, I'm not even sure. Johnston County. Okay. So we know we live in Wake County, and we know the town we live in, but there's a lot of small towns. So in a similar way, this is an actual block in the country. So in this block, you can see there's about 20 villages. So part of the training is all the disciple makers are mobilized to visit every village in their block, doing prayer walking, looking to share the gospel. And as they go, they find out two basic questions. Number one, are there Christians in this village? And if there are, it goes yellow. That's the yellow color. If there's Christians and there's churches, it's a green color. And if there's no Christians and no churches, it goes red. So every one of our training centers, as they do the survey work, they put together a heat map of where the Christians are, where the churches are, and where the gospel has yet to go. So you can see in this map here, there's a few churches right in the middle, and basically every village that surrounds those few churches has no church. So every one of our training centers can become much more strategic, much more intentional, because in a place like this on the map there's a tendency for the Christians to become a holy huddle and gather together. You can see how they're all together there. This helps them much more strategically say, okay, there's this many villages left in our block. Who's going to take which village? And as they go, in every block, there's 7,000 blocks in India just like this.
Wow.
We can actually chart the progress of seeing a church in every village. And right now, there's about 350,000+ villages estimated with no known church presence at all.
If I could add to that, 350,000 villages, to put that number in perspective, there are approximately 350,000 churches in the United States. So every time you have driven by a church building in your life, there is a corresponding village in those two countries that have never ever had a church. These people are not rejecting Jesus Christ. They don't know who he is. And the reason they don't know who he is because no one has ever told them. Scott, you said something at the first of the service today that we work for you guys. We do. This is not TTI's project. This is Crossroads' project. TTI can't do anything without you guys and other churches like you. Your people that are listening at home right now, this is their project. And the way they get involved, there's a couple of things they can do. Number one, we need prayer. These are not easy areas. I've actually got my email. I think they're going to put that up on the screen. If we were able to meet together in person today, Scott, I'd have some prayer cards, and I'd say if you're willing to pray, see me after. A lot of your folks already pray. But for those sitting at home right now, if you'll either jot down my email address or take a picture of it or something, and if you'll just shoot me an email later today or tomorrow and say, hey, I go to Crossroads, put me on the prayer team. What I'll do is I'll forward their name and email. And the biggest way, the most important way Crossroads can help is through prayer. Listen, some of these places, there are going to be people put in jail. Their houses are going to get burnt down. They're going to get beat up. Probably going to be some people killed. And you're walking in little villages where they've been worshiping literally demons for centuries. Those demons don't roll over and play dead. It's a very difficult place, and we need prayer. That's something your little kids can do that. We need prayer. The second way that we can work together is through giving. And for every $300 that Crossroads can raise, we can put a church in one of those villages, that map you just saw Jared showed, the red. We can put a church in one of those villages that have never ever had a church for just $300. And I think, Scott, I know we've talked a little bit, and we're going to play things by ear, I guess, but I think the goal is to try to raise about $37,500 for this project. Mm-hmm. To put that in perspective, $37,500, for every $300 we can plant a church. So for $37,500, Crossroads this year will plant 125 churches. Not just 125 churches, but 125 churches in 125 villages that don't have a church. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a lot of people coming to Jesus Christ, and that just kind of excites me.
I love it.
Amen. Okay, so TTI, your product is changed lives. I love to hear stories. I think sometimes I'd get caught up in, and we've said it a lot here, church is not the building, church is the people. Mm-hmm. So the church is actually watching us online. We're just in a building. So when it comes to these churches, these people plants that we're doing in all of these other countries, I want to hear, do you have favorite stories? Do you have transformed lives? Like, give me something. Challenge me.
Yeah, I want to share two with you that have happened in the last year since the last time I was here. And keep in mind, with these thousands of church, these stories are coming in all the time. We could just spend weeks sharing them. But we've got a picture of a guy named, I call him Happy Calm, okay? He's out of someplace in Asia, and he was an animist, an animal sacrificing animist / Buddhist, okay? And he had problems with his wife. His wife left him. She just left him, and she went across the border into China. And he was so upset, so devastated that his wife left him, he burnt his own house to the ground because it reminded him of his wife, and it just broke his heart. So he loses his wife. He burns his house down to the ground. Then he attempted suicide and was unsuccessful. Then he was out in the fields working, and he had some kind of an accident out farming, and he ended up being blinded. And the guy is just, he's just like, there's like this dark cloud over loses his wife, burns his house down, attempted suicide. Now he's blind, and he's just lost everything. And a TTI church planter, disciple maker came along, heard his story, prayed for him, shared Jesus with him. And if I can just read Com's testimony.
Yes, sir, please.
This is what he said. Listen to these words. These are his words. I felt that I needed to accept Jesus as my Savior, that he could save me. I confessed my sins and gave my life to Jesus. Jesus filled me with a joy and peace and gave me a purpose to live. I'm thankful to the man who shared Jesus with me. And now I'm telling others what Jesus has done for me. And he is also changing their lives as I share my testimony. See, he's not just a disciple. He's a disciple making disciples. He's a disciple maker. And I don't know. Somebody at Crossroads may have been the one that wrote out a check for $300 that trained the guy that introduced Happy Calm to Jesus Christ. And then one more story. I know time's just about out. I was just in Myanmar a few months ago. I've got a picture of a line of people, just 13 people in this line you're looking at. And what this is, it's a picture of the guy on the far left led the person to the Lord to his right, discipled them. That person then, or to my right, here as I'm looking at the picture, that person then led the next one to the Lord, discipled them. That person led the next one. Chris, Scott, there were 13 people in that line. There was actually 14. The 14th guy just got baptized outside. He hadn't changed his clothes yet to get in. He didn't get in time for the line. This all happened in less than 2 years. Wow. In other words, picture at Crossroads, one person going out where they live, work, study, shop, and play, leading someone to the Lord, discipling that person, who in turn leads someone to the Lord, and that is every pastor's dream,
Yeah.
and that makes heaven rejoice. But here's what I want you to see. Take a look at that picture. The people who were standing there, they didn't just line up, they told their story. In that line of 13 were drug addicts, alcoholics, people making sacrifices to animals. There was a thief. There were several people up there that were sick, that God healed them. There was a Buddhist monk who'd been living in a cave. There was a terrorist and arms dealer selling weapons. There was several people that were demonized. There was a widow who had 3 little children. The stories up there are amazing. And I just sat there and I thought, man, I was 65 at the time. I'm 65 years old. I've been doing this for a long time. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, if I can see 4 generations within a couple of years, that's like a home run to me. So again, somebody wrote out a check, $300. You're looking at the fruit of it right there. So the stories are just incredible. God is still in the business of changing lives.
Yes, sir.
So what's the best way we can be praying for TTI for you guys?
New partners. Everybody listening at home right now knows somebody who would be excited about this or who would like to participate. I don't know how you're set up, but if they can take this service and somehow forward it to somebody else. I can barely turn my computer on, so I have no idea how to do that. But we need new partners. And then what Jared has discussed, this church in every village, you're talking hundreds of thousands of churches, and you guys are going to knock out, Lord willing, 125 of them this year.
Amen.
But that still leaves 364,875. So we need all the partners we can. And then I think the other thing is this. We've talked about the coronavirus today and how that's affecting. But the parts of the world we're working in, the corona is not even on their minds. The problems that they face, the persecution, the difficulties. Jared, maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I called one of our leaders in Asia and just asked, just this last week, how are you doing in the midst of Corona? And his response was a little harsh to me, saying that's the least of our concerns right now. And there's a few pictures. Some of them may be a little bit graphic. But this is in a place in Asia where they've been fighting for more than a year. So every day almost, there's bomb blasts. There's people that are literally running for their lives. They're hiding in the jungle. We have over 100 plus of our own church planters being trained in the midst of this with their spouses, their children. Every day they're running from bullets, they're running from blasting. So we have a few pictures there. This is just the midst. You can see all of the people in the jungle. They have no idea where they're going to sleep tonight. They have no idea where they're going to get their food tonight. And that's not to downplay the challenges that we face here in America, but this is the reality of a lot of people in the world. The majority world, they don't have the systems and the structure and the safety nets that we have here. And this is connected back to the different people groups, but persecution is very real around the world. To say the name of Jesus in these villages who worship other gods for centuries will literally get you killed. So I think an understanding and an appreciation and just pausing to pray for these people can go a long way, to know that people around the world are praying for them. I'm not sure if we have time for the video or not, but persecution is a real thing. And this little video we have here is actual notes, emails, and messages sent from the field about actual church planters that are facing persecution. So let's watch this video.
Persecution. The Bible records stories of strength by some of the very first Christians. It continued in the early church. They were threatened, arrested, beaten, and even killed. It wasn't safe to share the gospel, or even to believe, but God transformed their lives. They shared the good news when it cost them every worldly thing. And because of that, millions now know Jesus. But their stories of persecution weren't the last ones written.
Hindu radicals came to our church. They shouted and threw rocks at us. A riot broke out as the public joined the attack. We were locked in the building and the police were called on us. Our crime? Following Jesus.
Of the 23 Christian women I mentor, about a third of them are beaten by their drug-addicted husbands who hate Christians. One of these women, Saita, has repeatedly tried to gather believers together to worship. Each time she's had to stop because her husband's beatings were life-threatening. It is humbling to witness this kind of faith in the Lord.
I was amazed to see Jesus heal the sick over and over again. I accepted Jesus as my Savior, and He healed me completely. I thought my family would rejoice with me, but instead they were outraged. They gave me an ultimatum. If I chose Christ, I would have to leave the village. I chose Christ.
Soon after becoming a Christian, I was dragged and kidnapped. My captors said that if I didn't convert to their religion, they would kill me. I thought of Daniel in the lion's den, and rather than deny Christ, I shared the gospel with them. I was held by them for
As we shared the gospel, we began to encounter opposition in the community. It was not long before I was evicted by my landlord and left without
Miss
a home.
Rabah was murdered on June 14th between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. The family believes she was killed for her faith in Jesus. It appears that a killer
We are
tried...
writing to ask you that you please pray for Pastor Chehel. Political radicals beat him up very badly last night on his way home.
However, I discovered the more I prayed for my persecutors, the more burdened I felt to bring the gospel to them.
All of us out of my home failed.
The next day, a jury selected by the same radicals said they would release us on one condition. We had to sign a document renouncing Jesus. Fearing for their lives, the families ahead of us all signed until it was my family's turn. My mother took the pen, marked the paper and looked the judge in the eye as she handed it back. They examined the document and immediately beat her to death in front of us. My mother had not signed her name. She had drawn a cross. Inspired by her boldness, 5 other families refused to sign the document.
The same God-given strength that inspired people and built the kingdom thus far is still building it every day.
Scott and Chris, Corona is not stopping this. This continues on, as does the poverty, as does all the other stuff our brothers and sisters are facing. And that's why I said a few moments ago, what we really need is prayer. And I think they're going to put my email address up one last time. If, for those of you listening at home, boy, if you can join us in prayer. These are not stories we pulled off the internet. These are people that we work with, that we know this stuff is really happening. So, yeah, let's give, but please, let's pray.
Yeah. You got any final words you want to share with us before we go?
Yeah, I think I can speak for Jared and me both. We love this church. I'm just so honored to be part of your team. You guys are incredible. You're just incredible. I just thank God for the opportunity. Maybe next Palm Sunday, if you'll have me back, hint, we can actually meet together as a...
I think you're already
band.
marked down.